Hi y'all, Kraken Latte here. So it seems I have a lot of viewers who are new to WoW, and I get asked about lockouts and resets and similar things fairly often. Since I do a fair amount of instance-related videos, let's take a look at how all of that even works. But first, let's give a warm welcome to my newest patron, Keto. Thank you so much for your support, and welcome to the Kraken crew. Alright, let's get into it. First, the most basic of rules, resets and lockouts. So you've cleared a normal dungeon and want to do it again, but how? Once you leave the dungeon, right-click on your character portrait and select Reset All Instances. You can use the macro I have on screen to reset it, and some add-ons like Loot Appraiser, for example, can reset it with a button. Now, lockouts. What are these and how do they work? First, the lockout itself. Instance lockout is a little hidden timer that only allows you to enter 10 instances, any 10 or 10 of the same one, within an hour. So just running in and out of a dungeon 10 times will hit this cap, regardless of difficulty, and regardless of whether or not you actually cleared anything. Something to note is that this timer is not every hour on the hour, but rather begins the second you enter your first instance of the day. So, if I enter a dungeon at 10:16, and proceed to do it 10 times in under an hour, I can enter the 11th at 11:16. Now, what about the instance itself? So, raids are weekly, period. This never changes. All levels of raids are on a weekly timer that will only reopen after the weekly reset. This means that if you enter the raid again after already clearing it, you will not get loot. These raid difficulties may or may not be on a separate lockout from each other too. I'll cover this in more detail later in the video. Dungeons, though, have 3 lockouts, one for each difficulty: normal, heroic, and mythic. Normal dungeons are hourly lockouts, meaning with the big instance lockout rule I mentioned, you can do 10 whole normal dungeons in a single hour. Heroic is daily, so you can do this once every daily reset. And mythic is like a raid. These are weekly and unlock after the weekly reset. Mythic Plus is a whole other animal and new since Legion. I'll cover this one at the end since it's a bit more complicated. One more thing to point out before we move into specific types of lockouts. The 10 an hour lockout rule has some caveats. This lockout is restricted to your server and WoW account. This means if I run a dungeon 10 times on the server Moonguard, I can hop over to Wormrest Accord and run 10 more. This is part of the reason I keep my Horde and Alliance tunes on 2 different servers. So if I go do gold runs, my 2 factions have separate timers. I also set a count though, didn't I? If you have a second WoW account, like WoW 3 for example, I mysteriously have no WoW 2, this account's lockout are separate from WoW 1, even if it's on the same server. So I can run a dungeon 10 times on Moonguard on WoW 1, then hop over to WoW 3 and do it 10 more times on Moonguard in the same hour. I hope all that makes sense. It really is that simple, and it's how I can kinda get around the instance lockout. Now that you understand how lockouts work, let's zoom in on raids and dungeon difficulties specifically and how these all tie in. So, raids. Weekly lockout, like I said before. But just like how dungeons have separate lockout timers for their difficulties, raids do too. Raids can have 4 levels: looking for raid, which is LFR, then normal, heroic, and mythic. All of these are still weekly. But, starting with the Siege of Orgrimmar raid in Mists of Pandaria specifically, you can do all the difficulties on the same character and get loot in the same week. So, I can do LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic, Blackrock Foundry for example, and get loot from all difficulties. I want to point out real quick that LFR's lockout is special. LFR is actually available for every raid starting with Dragon Soul back in Cataclysm. LFR is treated like a separate instance, so it has its own lockout and can always be ran even after you've gone through the other difficulties. I point that out for this reason. Raids before, so older, than Siege of Orgrimmar, do not let you run all difficulties in 1 week on the same character. And on top of that, these older raids actually have different difficulty levels. Siege of Orgrimmar and newer have Mythic. Raids before that do not, and are divided by raid size. So, Throne of Thunder, for example, has 4 difficulties, ignoring LFR, which are Normal 10, Normal 25, Heroic 10, and Heroic 25. And remember, only one of these can be ran by the same character in the same week. To get even more confusing, this style of the 10s and 25s was introduced in Wrath of the Lich King. So, this means that Vanilla and Burning Crusade raids only have one difficulty. Just one. You can't change it. So, I've kept all this info on the screen for you. Take a screenshot if you need it, but if you're still unsure, just look up the raid you want to run on Wowhead and see what difficulties it has. Let's move on to dungeons. Similar to raids, like I mentioned before, these can have 3 difficulties. Starting with Warlords of Draenor, dungeons have a Mythic level. Older ones do not. Now, dungeons are subject to the Blizzard Guinea Pig Funk too. As a random fact, Warlords of Draenor is the only expansion, as of this video, to have all 3 difficulties of Normal, Heroic, and Mythic on all its dungeons. This is because some dungeons in Legion and Battle for Azeroth do not have a normal level, so only Heroic and Mythic. Court of Stars and Siege of Borealis are examples of this. Dungeons prior to Warlords of Draenor do not have Mythic, like I mentioned. All of these older ones have Normal and Heroic, except the original Vanilla dungeons. These only have 1 difficulty, just like Vanilla raids. So, that's a lot of information with wonky rules. To give a visual aid to what I've been talking about, here's all the difficulties for both dungeons and raids on screen. So hopefully that helps this all make sense. Makes me sure wish they'd just unify these rules for all expansions, cause hot damn, this is a little more intense than I thought it'd be. Veteran players like myself are used to this, but I sure as heck remember how crazy it was to try and understand all this back when I started. Ah yes, one more thing to cover. I said I'd talk about Mythic Plus. So, this feature was added in Legion to Mythic Dungeons, so Legion, BFA, and probably Shadowlands will all have this feature. What this is a sort of modifier you can tack onto Mythic Dungeons to make them harder to do to get higher level loot. When you do a regular Mythic, what some folks now call a +0, you'll get a key that will let you come back to a dungeon that key is named for, and apply it. Then, successfully clearing the dungeon you used the key in on time will upgrade that key to let you do a harder version. So a +10 is far harder than a +2. To add to that, if I am not mistaken, Mythic Plus can be done over and over with no real lockouts. I have not done these in quite a while though, so feel free to share more on this point. Okay, I think that's just about enough on this topic. I hope this helped you all in some way, and if you feel like I missed something, please share it down in the comments below so we can all get savvy on this crazy drain. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, it's never too latte. And that's it. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and poke that bell for more Coffee Field content. Leave a comment down below if you liked it, and remember, it's never too latte.